All righty, that sends it over to me, and I get to introduce our speaker tonight. It's Chris Maxwell-Gaines, and Jessica Woods gave me his name. I knew that I wanted somebody to come speak to us about rain harvesting, and she gave me his name. Since the bio was up front, I'm just going to focus on what he's doing now. He currently started the business Innovative Water Solutions, and they design and build water conservation systems that focus on stormwater management and water conservation. They design and install rainwater, stormwater collection systems, stormwater management systems, and gray water reuse systems, as well as efficient irrigation systems and water conservative landscaping for residential and commercial products. To date, they've installed over 8 million gallons of rainwater storage capacity across the state of Texas. He's going to be coming back in October. This is only half of his presentation, so save up any questions you might have even for later on. Ask today, but know he's coming back in October to speak to us again on other aspects of rain harvesting. And here he is, Chris Maxwell-Gaines.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear. Is that good? I guess so. So, like Mary Gail said, I saw Jessica was on the participant list. So I wanted to thank Jessica from the city of Round Rock for passing my name over to Mary Gail, and I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight. And this is kind of interesting because I'm really used to having a live audience, and I'm the type of presenter that really feeds off of the live audience. And so definitely this is going to be a strange new experience for me. So I don't know where to look. And so if you're seeing me look around and not look at the camera, and so this is different. Anyways, so bear with me. Appreciate the opportunity. And like Randy was saying, any question that comes up during the presentation, just type it in. I'm going to be watching that so I can answer the questions immediately. You don't have to keep them all the way to the end of the presentation. So just type away. So yeah, so let's get going, and I will get to my screen. Okay. All right. I think we're good. Okay. So, sorry, I'm getting used to this split screen thing. Okay, all right, here we go. So yeah, tonight what I wanted to talk about is really the overall concept of rainwater harvesting. And obviously most of y'all on this call understand rainwater harvesting and the benefits and all that. And but I want to kind of take it to the next level. And by that, I mean, we want to explore some of the ins and outs and some of the nitty gritty of rainwater harvesting. And so in my presentation, it's very visual. So I'm gonna have a lot of, pictures. And towards the end of the presentation, we're going to be going through some do's and don'ts of rainwater harvesting. And so, yeah, so let's get going. So a little bit more about my company, Innovative Water Solutions. We started in 2004. This was right after my business partner and we returned from serving in the Peace Corps in South America, Suriname, South America. And there you can actually see Blake, my business partner, on the lower right in his village. And you can see the water tanks, the rainwater tanks in the back. And so we served in a country that, in villages where it was either dipping water from a river or trying to do a little bit of rainwater collection. And so living there for 2 years, it really hit home that how precious water is and really how much we take it for granted here in the United States. And so once we got back here, we decided that we wanted to continue some of the work that we were doing down there, and we decided to start our company. And initially we just started on rainwater harvesting systems, and that's all we were doing, and only for irrigation use. So smaller scale, urban, here in Austin. And then we slowly expanded to potable systems out in the hill country. But then as time went by, we started to realize that people were asking essentially how to use rainwater harvesting to solve drainage problems that they're having around their property. And so we really started to understand that there's a lot of people who have just drainage issues. And so we started to put out those, that type of service where we were just going out to implement swales and berms and trench drains and French drains and area drains, all that type of stuff. So that's the kind of the genesis of the company and to where we are nowadays. And I just realized that I hadn't updated this slide in a while, and so definitely just to kind of show some of the statistics. But yeah, we're over 8 million gallons of rainwater storage volume installed since 2004. We are over 1,000 customers, and we're almost at 600 rainwater systems. And these rainwater systems, vary from 500-gallon tanks all the way up to what's our largest 330,000 gallon system. So there's a wide range there, but just a lot of experience and a lot of things that we've seen over the years. So before I get going, I guess because I've been doing this for so long and I've seen so many DIYers, I've seen so many just different types of systems out there. I kind of came to this and started to put this psychology of rainwater harvesting together. So I think it's just a journey that a lot of us go through, and I'd like to kind of share it with everyone. And so stage one, you start off with the buckets and the pails and even coffee cups over there. But that's what you start off, you're just wanting to do something, collect it, dip it out, use it for your plants, and that's good, right? And so then that's where a lot of people start. And then they maybe take it up to the next step and they actually purchase a rain barrel, a commercially available or manufactured rain barrel, or even they just, augment a trash can to be a rain barrel. So it just looks a little bit better than a bucket. But yeah, so they take it to the next step. But then this is what typically happens with rain barrels. They fill very fast, and they do provide a good amount of water, but not enough water for maybe your needs. So therefore, people step up to the next step and they go, well, if it's overflowing, let me just add, some more barrels to it. And you can even see with a leaky, someone can solve their leaky hose bib issue. So they just put another barrel underneath it, right? But anyway, so they just think, hey, let's start putting these barrels together, and even creative stuff like this, right? So and just when you count up, the number of barrels and you multiply it by, their volume, in the end, it's overall not a lot of volume spread amongst a large footprint. So then you go, well, let's make it look good, okay? And that's rather than just being the plain old barrels, let's add some paint, some designs. Let's put them in a cabinet. Let's paint a Texas flag on it. Just do something to spruce it up a little bit, and that's good. And even to the point where, yeah, let's spruce it up and let's build a big wooden base for it so that we can, get it higher, so we can get some more pressure coming out of it. So a lot of effort, went into something like this. And so, yeah, in the end, you count, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 50. So that's, 400 gallons of water. And then, who knows how much time and effort went into, building this wooden base in order to support, all of that weight of that water. So a lot went into this. It looks good, but really to be effective, and I don't want to say do it right in terms of saying rain barrels aren't doing it right, but if you seriously want to take rainwater harvesting to the next level, it's going to take something where you're exploring larger volumes and harvesting them into a singular unit. So then it becomes easier to use with, say, a pump system. And so, this may be, a lot of people may think about this all the time, especially being master gardeners, natural naturalists. You're thinking about rainfall all the time. You're thinking about your plants and their health. And so there's this kind of hydrological cycle. And some of y'all might have seen this graphic out there, but I think it really plays well with how just generally society, we interact with our natural environment in terms of water resources and rainfall. And so, if you see starting over there, during a rainier period, everything is great. Reservoirs are starting to fill up. And so then that gets into where we're very apathetic. There's no more news stories out there on the local news about, the level of the lakes and all that stuff. But then next thing you know, as always, drought starts to come along. Our rivers and lakes starting to decline. And then we start to realize, hey, there's something going on, even though we should have been cognizant of that issue the whole time. And then we have a growing concern about it. And then hopefully it doesn't get to panic, but it does often, such as in the 2011 drought here in Central Texas. So, and then of course, something like the Memorial Day 2015 rain comes along, 20 inches, and fills up the Lake Travis and the Highland Lakes immediately in one day, and then the cycle just starts over. So I always like to use this in my presentations because the way that we think about water resources really needs to become top of mind for a lot of people. And I know for this audience it very much is, but for the general public, they're just concerned with Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. So another reason to kind of really focus in on our water resources is to start thinking about these more macro issues. And one of them is the growth of our urban populations, and our cities are really growing. And so what's happening is obviously water demand will be increasing. Now, over the years, a lot of cities were having a decreasing water demand because of just conservation efforts. And that's applauds, really want to applaud the effort of a lot of cities to cut down, household water use. But there's a baseline that we're going to get to. And then if you keep adding more people, then obviously the water demand is going to grow. We're not going to be able to go down anymore. And so this is something to really start thinking about. How can we use auxiliary water sources, and rainwater harvesting being an auxiliary water source? How can we use that to the benefit to reduce some of our water demand? Another big issue that's happening is the growth of impervious cover and the stormwater management issues that come from that. So as you can see, just imagine the amount of water that's flowing off of a, Lowe's parking lot. So we have to manage that in some way. And a lot of times that's just detaining it so that then we can slowly release it, and it'll mimic like if there was not a commercial, impervious cover over that green field. So this is something where potentially systems like rainwater harvesting could really help out and mitigate some of the effects of impervious cover in our urban areas. And then, obviously with myself and my company being in the drainage industry, we're seeing this a lot, where it's these localized flooding issues. So obviously the big storms are going to come along, and there will be things like, Onion Creek overflowing and causing, a lot of damage and flooding homes. And that's really sad to see. But you're also seeing a lot of just this localized flooding issues. And I know we can, I could even just not even know that it's raining outside, and we can just track it by the number of phone calls we get to our business on the size of the storm event. And because when these large storms roll through the area, it exposes a lot of problems for people, and naturally our calls go off the charts. And so we're seeing this more and more, and part of this is because of the amount of impervious cover that's being added to our urban areas. And then you get things like scour, with so much water flowing off the impervious cover into our waterways that weren't meant to convey that amount of water or that speed or the intensity of water. So you're getting stream bank erosion happening, and a lot of cities, like the city of Austin, having to spend capital funds to implement projects to shore up these different stream banks in Austin. And then obviously there's an increase of stormwater pollution, and which is, just bad overall for our watersheds, for, the fish and animals that depend on the the water that's flowing into these creeks. And so, there's ways to mitigate this. And again, rainwater harvesting is not going to be the end all, savior of all this, but these are just some really key reasons that, we need to start putting our eye towards managing stormwater through possibly collecting it. And to move on to the next big area of the reason for rainwater harvesting. And so I don't know, I'm not going to do any sort of poll on this, but, does anyone you can just answer that question. What do you think is the largest irrigated crop in the US? And maybe some of y'all have heard this before. And obviously I wouldn't be putting up a picture of crops if it was crops. Actually in America, it is turf grass, is the largest irrigated. Hey, Jessica, yeah, you got it, lawns. So there you go. So when we start thinking about it, why are we using municipally treated potable water to spray on our lawns when we have a perfectly great opportunity to use rainwater? And just an example from the city of Austin. And so this graph is showing 2 years. The green is 2007. Near the bottom, you see it's kind of spiky, and then the yellow is 2011, and that's a dry year, obviously. And you can see the differential, and this is City of Austin water use. And so this on the left, the scale is million gallons per day, and so you can see there's a vast difference between the wet and dry year. So the wet year average in the summertime 150 million gallons a day, to the dry year 210 million gallons a day. And I grant you that wasn't everyone taking more showers during a dry year. And so basically 60 million gallons a day during the summertime between these 2 years for the city of Austin was used just to put out on our plants and our landscaping. So something to consider when you really put it in that scale, and 60 million gallons of water used for irrigation use a day is pretty baffling, right? Just the enormity of it. And then the other thing is to kind of think about our weather patterns. And so I like to show this just because I like to show the change of the conditions, not only in Texas, but in the US. So yeah, this was September 28, 2010. Everything in the US here in Texas all looked pretty good. Not really any drought much to speak of. Everything was hunky-dory, right? And then within a span of 1 year, this is what happened. And so it just shows you how things can dramatically change with climate and particularly rainfall. And so from here, then we kind of bumped along, the next year. And these are all roughly a year apart. And so you can see the kind of the time change. And so see the drought kind of moved up into the Midwest, still kind of lingering, around 2014. And then we're slowly moving out, getting better, getting a little better. It's definitely in the Texas-wise US. But you can see really to return back to the level of 2010, it took about 6 years, right, to get through that. And so I just kind of use this as a way to say that, we have to be prepared for, what's coming in the future. And there's going to be a lot of climate change issues. And so having the ability to harvest rainwater, because, even during that dry year of 2011, it still rained about 15 inches here in Central Texas, annually that year. So we still got rain. It wasn't like it was nothing at all. So there were still opportunities to collect rainwater even during the driest of drought years. And so to be able to have that opportunity to basically buffer your risk and get you to the next kind of point is a great opportunity for rainwater harvesting. This is really cool. I like to just kind of show that difference again, to go from, a really dry time to a really wet year. So this is over in Hudson Bend, October 1st, 2013. And then this is the same point picture, but obviously May 27, 2015. And so after Memorial Day. So the intense rains that came through. So just really amazing differential. And that just really clues us in that we need to be, realize that this type of back and forth is going to happen, and we need to constantly be using our water resources smartly as we go forward. And then another kind of big thing with water is embodied energy. And so, or sometimes really you hear it as the water energy nexus or energy water nexus. And basically it means it takes energy to produce water for consumption. And then conversely, it takes water to produce energy. You think of cooling, thermal electric plants, they need water for cooling, using it for steam generation, all that stuff. So there's a lot of embodied energy in the water that we have to use as a society. And so I kind of put this graphic together to kind of show where this embodied energy comes into play. So when you think about it, all water at one time is rain, right? It gets into the water cycle, comes down, rains down from the sky, into our watersheds, into our lakes, into our rivers. It infiltrates into our aquifers. And so then that's part of the water cycle, right? And so then we come in and we're pulling the water out of our lakes. We're pumping it out of our aquifers so that we can treat it. And then we treat it, and then we put it into our system so that we can push it out into the distribution system. And then our cities have miles and miles and miles of water pipes that all that water is going through in order to get to our homes. And then once it's there in our homes, what do we use it for? Well, of course we use it for indoor use, but we're also using it for irrigation and outdoor use as well. And so you can see that basically we're starting with the rain coming down, we're harvesting that water, and then we're having to put a lot of energy into it to clean it and then to pump it miles and miles around our cities. And then on the flip side, our wastewater is essentially the same thing. We're doing the same thing. We're collecting it, we're pumping it miles and miles, we're treating it, and then putting it back into the environment. And so obviously, hopefully where I'm leading with this, rainwater harvesting. It's a much simpler, idea, and it can strip out a lot of that embodied energy. So we start with the rain, and then if we know the end result is irrigation use, well, obviously rainwater collection, boom, 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 very simple. We cut out a lot of steps, and so therefore you're cutting out a lot of that carbon footprint that is associated with a lot of our, most of our water resources that we use in our society. So I hope that that kind of setup was and really enticed y'all to understand, why rainwater harvesting is really important. And yes, and Richard just kind of pointed out that some cities do have the toilet to tap, but that's there's only really a couple, I believe, and I think Wichita Falls in Texas is one of the closest, where they're actually taking treated wastewater, putting it into the reservoir, and then the reservoir right there is pulling the water out to be treated for potable use. I think El Paso has a direct injection well, so they're taking treated wastewater, injecting it into the aquifer, and then miles away, then they're pulling that water out. So there are some cities that are trying to buffer the risk of droughts because the 2011-2012 time period really taught a lot of our cities that they need to be thinking about the future. So rainwater harvesting. So just to start off here, right, the average annual precip in Texas. So this is really great because a lot of states don't have this range of rainfalls to where we're desert in West Texas and then all the way to tropical rainforest essentially in East Texas. And so we have this really great opportunity to experiment with, where's the best place for rainwater harvesting. Is it worthwhile to collect rainwater in El Paso when it only rains 14 inches on average there a year, and most of that comes in maybe 2 or 3 rain events with the monsoon, or is it beneficial to collect it in Houston when they get 50 inches a year, and they're just worried about getting the water away. So it's really awesome to see the different kind of climates here in Texas and trying to apply rainwater harvesting to those different climates. So just very basic, the math, rainwater harvesting, 1 inch of rain over 1,000 square feet gives you 623 gallons. It's a lot of water, and at the same time, it's not a lot of water. So, but it is just a free resource that can easily be tapped when anyone has a structure, roof to collect it from. And again, a lot of y'all understand the benefits of rainwater harvesting, and as I've mentioned before, the opportunity to reduce stormwater runoff. A lot of times when we come into a situation where people are having drainage issues, a lot of times a big culprit is the runoff from the roof surface. And so that's what, when we decided to add drainage into our mix of services, we were really trying to hope to figure out the nexus of, if someone needs a drainage solution, can we come in and pitch the idea of doing a rainwater harvesting system so that, yes, they can solve their drainage issue by collecting the water off the roof rather than letting it pool around the house and cause issues? Can we collect it into a tank, and then once it's collected there, then we have the opportunity to direct the overflow to a better spot so it doesn't cause the flooding issues that the customer was having. So we over the years, we have done a lot of projects like that, where someone started off thinking of just about fixing drainage, and then that morphed into, hey, let's actually collect the water and then allow that customer to use it for lawn and landscaping purposes. So the three main uses is, first one is outdoor water use. Very simple, not much needed. I mean, simple rain barrel is good to go with that. But then obviously you can expand on, and with typical outdoor use, keeping the big type of organic matter out of the storage container is very beneficial. But if you don't, and something gets in there, then it basically kind of becomes like a compost tea, and that's also beneficial to your plants. So it's not bad, if some organic matter gets into your rainwater tank, if you are using it just for outdoor use. The next step is, the next step is indoor non-potable. And so the idea here is now, and really all cities, since it's a state law, now you can actually bring rainwater back indoors, even if you have a municipal water tap on your site. Prior to 2015, you could not use rainwater indoors, but a law was passed and that allows that. So rather than taking it all the way to potable use, you can bring it in for indoor non-potable, such as toilet flushing, clothes washing. And so we've only done a few of those projects because obviously it fits well if it's a new build rather than a retrofit. So opportunities may be a little few and far between. And then the next step and last step is potable water supply. And we're doing a lot of that in the hill country, or just in rurally, even East Texas. We're starting to see a lot more demand, people out there, rather than drilling a well, they're wanting to implement a rainwater system. So that's the three uses. And so when you, this is one of the biggest questions that I get all the time is, how big of a tank should I implement, should I install? And that's hard to answer without having more information. But to kind of think about it and put your mind in the right spot to kind of figure out the best size of your collection system, you want to take into account your collection surface size. So obviously if you're only collecting from one downspout and it's only pulling 200 square feet, there's no reason to go and put a 3,000 gallon tank on that, right? So you want to consider that. You want to consider the storage volume size, because these things can really start to have a big footprint, and they can really start to eat up a lot of real estate. So you want to look at the area that you're going to be locating your tank, and can you put as large of a tank as you want in that space. And then last is your expected demand. Are you going to feed it into an irrigation system, like a spray irrigation, and you want to really use a lot of water? Are you just going to be using it a single hose bib? Are you going to be using it water pails, to water your plants? What's your demand out of that? And so those three things kind of come together. And then from that, I've created these three different methods. So design for optimization, design for space, and then design for budget. So design for optimization, it really works out well if you have good numbers about how much water you need. And so typically on a commercial project, there'll be a landscape architect who's designing the landscape and will be putting out a demand calendar or schedule to know how much water that landscaping may need over the year. And they take into account the ET rate, monthly ET rate and all that stuff. And so from that, they can get a monthly demand, and then we can add in the monthly rainwater collected, and then we can adjust the cistern sizes so that we can try to minimize this number of zeros in the summer month. If that's a goal of that project, is to supply as much rainwater and decrease the amount of municipal water as much as possible, then you want to try to increase either the collection surface or increase the cistern size to meet that demand or meet that goal. So in lieu of having the exact demand for your plants, just going about and having a general idea, and even using your own water bills or something like that, you can use that data to at least give you a good starting point. And then in places where we have that feast and famine of rain events, very long, heavy rain events, and then droughts, it's really important to try to put as much investment in your storage volume as you possibly can. And so to highlight that, I use this little graph. So the pink here, or purple, is showing a hypothetical landscape demand. And so you can see that it peaks during the hot, dry summertime here in Texas. And then this is off of a 3,000 square foot house. And so then the blue is showing the hypothetical or the actual rainwater collection off of that 3,000 square feet. And so here in Central Texas, typically May is our highest rainfall month, and that's about a little over 5 inches here in Austin. So you can see you're collecting a lot of water during that springtime over what you really need. And so you can see now what we're trying to do with storage volume is you want to capture that water, and you actually want to figure out a way to move that volume over into the time when you need it. And so we want to try to size the storage volume as large as we can without going overboard, keeping in mind the optimization idea. Design for space is obviously a big one because when you're dealing in an urban environment, you'll have these limitations about if you're in an HOA, they may have a limitation about a tank can't be higher than a fence, right? So then you have your fence height limitation, and so we should just size the tank to maximize that, and we shouldn't think about anything else. Or like in this example, what if you wanted the tank to sit here and you did not want to see it from around the corner? Well, so then you have a tank diameter limitation, and so we're going to size the tank accordingly. And then obviously we always have a gutter height limitation, because you can't have a tank that is taller than your gutter unless you want to pump the rainwater into the tank. And so in lieu of doing that, as long as the gutter is taller, then the rainwater tank water will flow by gravity into that tank. So using these limitations, we can design a rainwater system for that space. Now, last but not least, is design for budget. So, we have a lot of people who are very excited, that come to us very excited about wanting to implement a rainwater system. And, they think it's going to be so awesome, and they just want to do so much with it. And we're very happy to help them along, but we also have to realize that, most people have budgets. And so we really try to optimize the system design and system operation to maximize the budget as much as possible. So something always to keep in mind when you're looking at these systems. So there's two types of rainwater systems. And so the first one we'll talk about is a dry rainwater system. And so you can see example there. And so essentially what's happening with a dry system is the water comes into the collection pipe, and then the collection pipe goes into the top of the tank. Imagine a rain barrel, so downspout into a rain barrel. Well, after a rain event, this pipe will dry out. And so hence the dry rainwater system. And so you can see with this diagram some of the other features that's sometimes included in a rainwater system, first flush diverter, calming inlet, etc., overflow, vent. But basically, this is a basic setup of a dry system. And so you can even have dry systems where you're collecting from multiple downspouts, like in this, where it was kind of like an aqueduct kind of idea, pulling the water from these two downspouts over. But after the rain event, this pipe will dry out. So all the water will essentially flow into the rainwater tank. Here's another one, just a much bigger tank. And so from this barn here, the rainwater's collected, and then there's just a dry pipe. And then obviously there's a first flush that fills up first, and we'll talk about first flush more in detail in a little bit. But basically this is another a dry system. It just is going into two big 10,000 gallon tanks. And so, like I said, the pipes will drain completely after the rain event. Typically these type of systems are smaller, easier to install and maintain. But the one big thing is the tank must be located close to the collection surface. Again, unless you do want to have a flying pipe that is flying over from your downspout over to the tank. But typically a dry system involves a tank being pretty much up against your house. So the next type of system is a wet system. And so you can see here, you may be able to see some of these downspouts coming down, right? There's nothing flying over, so there's no dry system here. So this is a wet system. You can see before the backfill was done, you can see some of the piping down here at the bottom. And diagram wise, so this is what's happening. So rain is collected in the gutter, and then it goes down, and then you may have another pipe that's coming from other downspouts around the house. But essentially this pipe here will fill up with water, and everything has to be watertight. So all of these joints have to be glued, PVC watertight. And so once that water starts to rise in the downspout and the riser pipe, right, it gets to this point and it's going to then spill into the tank. And so if you shot an elevation over to here, then that would be the point where the water is going to stop in that riser, in that downspout pipe. And so this is essentially a wet system, because after the rain is ended, this pipe stays wet. Or it can if you don't have a clean out or a drain mechanism on it, which we always recommend. But theoretically, this pipe would stay wet after a rain event. And so here's an example from a commercial from a fire station in Denton. You can see the downspout coming down. There's also other downspouts that feed into a pipe underground here. And then we actually have the inlet pipe coming through the slab and into the inside of the tank, so that it's a very clean look to it. And we did the same thing with the overflow. So the overflow pipe comes down inside through the slab and then out to the stormwater piping system. So a very clean system, again, rather than having a pipe flying over through the air. Here's a residential example, and you can just see one of the downspouts coming down, and you can see by shooting an elevation over, we're really far down from it. So, we're probably a good, 6-7 feet below that point. And so water's going to come down here and then up and into it. So there's your wet system. And the water remains in the pipes. That's the main definition of wet rainwater system. Your gutter, the bottom of your gutter must be above your tank inlet. You will also want to account for some friction loss as the water is going through the pipe. So you don't want to be perfect with that. You want to give yourself some buffer. But the biggest benefit is now you can put your storage tank wherever you want to put it. So if you have a corner of your property that's just a dead corner, well, we can locate a rainwater tank there, and we can make that a usable corner, and we can bring all the water from your roof to that point. So obviously this leads to a greater collection efficiency. You're collecting from a larger portion of your roof, and possibly you even have a larger tank to collect it into. So just a much more efficient system. And essentially what's happening here is it's a P-trap. And so if you imagine this is the gutter, and then here's the downspout, and here's the underground pipe, and then here's the riser pipe that goes next to the tank, and then it spills over. And then if you imagine here's your tank, and so this underground pipe and the riser pipes from the downspouts and into the tank stay surcharged with water. So there's no pumps, there's nothing. This is all done by gravity. And again, it's just water's trying to seek its lowest level. And so that's it. So it's just a big P-trap you're creating. So I'm going to step through a few of the different rainwater system components. Another big question we get all the time is, can I collect rainwater from an asphalt shingle roof? And the short answer is yes, you definitely can. The long answer is, obviously there would be possibly some, asphaltic, polyaromatic hydrocarbons coming off of shingle roofs. But in the end, if you have surviving plants around your house, and if the water has been coming off your asphalt shingles for years, falling into your planter beds around your house, and all your plants are good, then typically you're going to be good collecting rainwater from an asphalt shingle. And so that's kind of a funny answer, but yeah, it's perfectly fine. Now when you step into wanting to collect the rainwater for potable use, now you really want to start looking at other types of roofs, such as metal, clay, concrete, or slate, and because of, again, not having the opportunity to for some of those toxins that could be in that roof material. Next, you have your gutters and then your gutter screening, and this really is your first line of defense. And so, especially for irrigation systems, you're wanting to keep the big stuff out. So the leaves, the twigs, the acorns, those typically are the things that once they get into a gutter, they cause the gutter issues and overflows and all that stuff. So you're really wanting to try to do something either at the gutter screening level, or even, as you see here, a little rain head is what we call it. And it has a slanted screen on it, as well as a flat screen inside there. But basically it helps to kind of slough off any leaves that may get into the gutter and into here. Again, just keeping that really large debris out. The smaller debris, the pollen, that type of stuff is going to get through. And you really don't want a screen at your gutter level to screen that out, because you would be cleaning that every single rain event, or after every single rain event, because it would just get clogged up so bad. And so again, irrigation use wise, that type of stuff getting through is definitely okay. And so inlet filtration is vital. And I show this as an example because this was a project where the homeowner took the advice of the gutter installer to use this type of screens, even though they had cedar elms dumping onto their roof. And so after the first season of cedar elm droppings and everything, they had water coming out of the gutters, not collecting into their rainwater tank. And then they called us saying there's something wrong. And we said, yep, there's definitely something wrong. The screening is not matched up with the type of debris that's coming down, because obviously the cedar elm debris can get through this type of screening. So we did have to change it to a different type of screening. But basically, if water can't flow through your gutters, it can't get to your rainwater tank, and so then you're not collecting rainwater. So inlet filtration is definitely vital and a key part of a rainwater system. And then a lot of times when you're reading stuff on the internet, there's a confusion between inlet filtration, or just filtration, and first flush, and they are not the same. So they're two totally separate, different ideas. Inlet filtration obviously is keeping, like I said, the large debris out, and first flush is flushing that first bit of water that comes off your roof, so that the smaller particles that wash off your roof during that first wash will get wasted away, and it's not collected into your rainwater tank. So obviously, as you can see on the bottom here, the smaller particles, bird poop, pollen, dust, all that type of stuff, That's going to get through your inlet filtration, but then you employ your first flush to flush that first wash away. And so by implementing inlet filtration and the first flush together, that's your best practice there. And so how to accomplish first flush. So you can see here what's happening. Water's coming down from the gutter, getting into the pipe, and it first has to fall down into the first flush diverter here. So this is just a constant volume diverter. This is about 60 gallons, give or take. But what's happening here is you can see water's coming into the volume, and then there is actually, with this particular kit, there's a float ball that will float up. And then right here, there's a little constriction point. And so that ball will float up, seal that up right there. Once it seals that, then the water will continue to rise and then flow over and into the rainwater tank. So therefore you've flushed your first 60 gallons of water, off of that. And then at the bottom here, it starts to kind of meter itself out. There's a little dripping mechanism down at the bottom there. So that's kind of a real easy, common way for first flush. So how much first flush? That's a good question. And it really depends on the research you read. It's really all over the board. Stuff from Germany and South Africa and all these different places. Just it's crazy, all the different equations that these professors and academics come up with. But it really just ultimately depends on, how are you using the water, what type of roof type, and if there's any locational issues, like say you're near a plant that's spewing out some sort of air pollution. But the Texas Water Development Board suggests at least 10 gallons of first flush per 1,000 square feet of collection area. And so we kind of run with that, that number. So then after first flush, there's an opportunity to potentially filter the rainwater again through a secondary filter, like through this tank inlet filter that you can see. The key thing is make sure that it's accessible. Don't plumb it in so where you glue in everything and you can't get to that screen, but make it accessible like we have here with a rubber coupling, which then this whole U can be removed and then you can get to that secondary screen. A lot of times these secondary screens are really on the larger tanks and not so much on the smaller poly tanks or galvanized metal tanks. Then after the water is collected, you want to use it. And so one easy way to use it obviously is with a pump system, so that then you can use it in a water hose or a sprinkler, a manual sprinkler, and to distribute that water out to your plants. You can size, of course, the pump for different demands, what you need it for. And there's obviously different types. Are you going just to one single hose bib? So then you put your water hose on it. Do you want to connect it to your irrigation system? Do you want to have it, on demand? So there's different types of pump systems out there. And then I always say you don't have to settle for your on-site water pressure. So meaning, you have your city water coming in, but for whatever reason, you want to dial it up a bit on your rainwater system, you certainly can do that. And then these kind of showing some examples. So this is a typical potable pump setup. So you have your filters, cartridge filters, and then your UV system to disinfect the rainwater. And this is kind of a typical irrigation pump setup. There's a pressure relief valve here. But then what you're seeing up here is a bit of an autofill system. And so we'll talk about that here in a slide or so. Water level gauges. So there's a couple different ones on the market from, very simple, inexpensive, that just gauge, when it's full to when it's empty. And then you have this plumb bob style that actually goes up and down with the water level. So different types out there. There's electronic ones if you really want to get fancy, and they have readouts that you can put inside your house, all that stuff. Your backup water supply. So, this really comes into play if you're connecting your rainwater system to an irrigation systems, because that irrigation system's going to go off, once a week. I think that's most cities around here. I guess there's other cities that may be out of drought stage, but maybe twice a week, 3 times a week. It's going to be coming on early morning. You don't want to worry about do I have enough rainwater in my tank? Is it going to go dry? Because obviously you don't want to run your pump dry. And so if you are going to connect it to an irrigation system, then you can employ an autofill system. And so you can see what's happening here is the municipal water is coming up here, and then it goes into this air gap, essentially is what you're seeing here. And then it flows into the tank. And then basically we set it so that then the fill float only will fill about a foot of water, I guess, if you want to call it that. So it just keeps a minimum amount of city water in that tank at all times so that your pump never runs dry. So anyways, always want to consider a backup if you are having an automated irrigation system connection. Then you have your RPZ. So if you are installing a pump, now this is a pressurized auxiliary water system. And so therefore, the city wants to protect their water supply from any potential issues that could happen if you make the wrong connection on your side. And then if you are pumping the water, theoretically, you could put in a pump that's pushing higher pressure than the city pressure. And therefore, you could push untreated rainwater back into the city. So therefore, a special backflow prevention device is installed if you do have a pump system. If you just have a large tank with a hose bib on it, there's no need for an RPZ prevention device, a backflow device, but only if you're a pump. And so I definitely wanted to point that out. And so transitioning now, kind of went over the basics of kind of the how to design a rainwater system and into the different components. So now I want to get into some of the do's and don'ts. And these are things that I've collected either myself being out there and taking pictures when I go and visit people's homes or online. And so I do want to make a disclaimer. If any of these pictures are, you've done it that way, or that is your system, or your house or whatever, forgive me. I do not mean to point fun or anything. But no, inherently there's nothing wrong. You can't really mess up rainwater harvesting. But I just kind of want to show off differences between some of the ways that could cause problems, and then ways that you can remedy that with different installation styles. So going back to the idea of rain barrels and daisy chaining rain barrels. Again, nothing inherently wrong with this, but when you add up all of that volume, right, and all of these pictures, you could easily get a single 500-gallon tank, or maybe a single 1,000-gallon tank, and have it in one spot, right? Rather than having this strung out. Now, I do have to say, some of this is, people are reusing, right? You're going to the local Dr. Pepper bottler, and they have these barrels for free. And that's great. So I don't want to, dissuade people from doing that, because you're reusing a product. That's absolutely great. But just know that, when you're trying to daisy chain all these things together, all those points where you make that connection at the bottom, particularly, that's a liability where something could go wrong and you could lose all the water, right? I got a question from Joel. Are people using these systems to collect condensate from AC systems? Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It is a great opportunity. The only issue is that typically a residential air handling unit, while it seems like it puts out a lot of AC condensate, in the end, it really doesn't. And so sometimes the mechanism of trying to collect the the AC condensate can involve some, pumps and whatnot to move it. If you have a perfect situation where it's dropping down from like your attic or something, then that's great. Absolutely use it. And so you can definitely tap onto AC condensate if you can, but just in my experience, it is a relatively low amount of water, particularly how our AC systems have gotten more efficient over the years and with new construction and all that stuff. So. Again, another example of a base that they had to create, and then a bunch of barrels and a bunch of connections and all that stuff. So again, just nothing bad about it, but just there's a better way to do it. Of course, like I showed before, it leads to this type of stuff, right? Overflow. And a lot of those, so this is a 1,000-gallon tank. So, excuse me, guys, sorry about that. So, this is a 1,000-gallon tank. So a lot of those rain barrel systems, that amounted up to less than this. And so this is a very clean, one single tank that can hold a lot of water. The complexity, sometimes, you can really overthink rainwater systems. And so if you start getting into a system where you need a diagram and to point out what's going on, maybe that's a little bit too much for that rainwater system. Something like this, I came across this in a house inspection I did for a potable rainwater system, and I can't tell you what is happening with this. And so again, we have to think about, you as the person who puts it in, or the homeowner, you may understand it, but what if you sell your house? What if and that's exactly what this was happening. They were selling this house and they were wanting an inspection to see, how does this rainwater system and the well water system, how do they jive and come together? So there's better ways of doing this. And again, simplistic layouts, keeping it clean as much as possible. Going back to that flying pipe, this one is really precarious because it's just such a long pipe, and there's a joint right in the middle that could be a liability where if it's not supported well on either side, this thing could just come crumbling down. Using the corrugated stuff, again, a good storm comes through, could just pop that thing right out of there. So again, making your connections as good as you can. Strapping pipe up on a house like this, again, nothing bad, nothing wrong per se, but you just start getting to aesthetics. This is the front of the house, people driving by, and so it's okay, it's fine, but just knowing that there's as we've talked about with wet systems, there's different ways to collect it. It doesn't have to be a dry system. This one I found online, and I was going, what the heck is going on here? So just, these are really long pipes. I'd hate to see after a few years, what's happening with the sag, of these pipes, because that definitely will happen. And so again, flying pipes, and again, showing an example that we installed a little bit of a flying pipe, but it's a small distance, so definitely less sag that pipe over the years. But yeah, there's, if you have to do a flying pipe, try to keep it so it's not so crazy. Or a wet system. And so you can see here, the downspout, there's one of the downspouts, and then obviously we're collecting from the entire house, and then that pipe is underground here and popping up right there to the first flush and then into the tank. And so again, to be able to collect the whole house, obviously you could not do a dry system. Commercial style, again, I always talk to architects about this. They design these, nice looking buildings and all that stuff, and then they say, oh, the owner wants to do rainwater harvesting, so they draw a circle on the plans, and then they go, well, how is the water going to get in? And they leave it up to whatever contractor to figure that out, and then this is what you get, this pipe flying through the air, really distracting from the building and what's going on. Again, back to our example here, where it could have been done in a wet system and been much cleaner and just aesthetically better for the building. Again, going back to connections, you can see, there's just so many, so many ways to do connections. There's buckets, there's duct tape, there's little wooden tops that people make and drill a hole in it. And again, nothing bad per se, but just, well, I would say something bad about this, because it being open, now it's just a mosquito breeding ground. So you definitely want to have very tight, very secure inlets and overflows from your rainwater volume or your storage tanks in order to eliminate the possibility of a mosquito breeding ground. So definitely there is some bad stuff, particularly with this one here. And then on things like metal tanks, using the right types of bulkheads, and also positioning, even though this one is a bulkhead that they're using, just the way they position it, they try to get it as high as possible. And then these type of tanks, they have these little strength ribs in here. And so because of that, that they weren't able to get a good seal. And so when rain is coming in, it's dripping down. And even though this is galvanized metal, it will rust. And so that's what you're seeing here happening on the outside of tanks. And so, coming in again with appropriate bulkhead, in a spot where you can get a good seal, not trying to jam it in where this rib will cause a problem. The overflow, we have things like these Mozzie stoppers. They're like a flap valve. So basically water, when it's overflowing, can shoot out. This is a little screen on it. So if it's a very small flow of water, it can come out. But basically it closes so that then mosquitoes can't fly up and get into the tank. So again, trying to secure all of your ins and outs of your rainwater tanks. Do-it-yourselfer inlet filtration. Again, nothing wrong with it as long as you keep up with the maintenance and you clean the debris off rather than this almost looks like bean sprouts, like someone's like doing an experiment with cultivating some food up here. But again, nothing wrong with having a homemade inlet filter, but just make sure to keep, maintain it. But again, there are products out there that are meant for that. And I showed you one earlier. This is a different style of a rain head. So it has that slanted screen that can flush off debris coming from the gutter. Or employ a screen inside the tank. So again, another option if you can't use a rain head in your system setup, then possibly using an inlet screen. Do not use a translucent tank. These type of tanks are meant for chemicals and chemicals only. Because chemicals will not grow algae. And if you want pea soup as your rainwater, then yes, be my guest, use a translucent tank, but that is what happens. So they look great and they look awesome when they first go in, but within a matter of time, that is what you're looking at. So definitely you want to use an opaque tank so that no sunlight gets in, because sunlight is what causes algae to grow. So if you can keep the sunlight out, you're going to have an algae-free tank. Now the algae-producing organisms may still be in the water coming, right off your roof and through the gutter and then into the tank. But if there's no sunlight, then they will not grow. So it keeps especially your outlet hose bibs free and clear, and they're not gunked up with algae. So here's just, your typical opaque tank. And nowadays, the current manufacturers, there's 5 different colors. There used to be a lot more colors available, but some consolidation is happening in manufacturing. And so, but these poly tanks are meant for no sunlight to get through them. And then you see these type of tanks out there a lot, right? And these are the syrup tanks. So these are things that are shipped around where they're carrying a very concentrated syrup, and then they ship it and then they dilute it and all that stuff. And then a lot of times you can find these for really cheap or even free. Well, the issue is they're translucent again, and that causes problems. And so if you do have an opportunity to get those tanks, you can see what this person did is they actually wrapped it with a poly, kind of like a Christmas present inside there, and then put the tank back inside the cage there. And so that's going to prevent the algae from growing. So really great augmentation to the system to include that poly wrap around the tank there. So some of this is, what I don't like is, this tree is right here, oak tree, and the tank right up next to it. This is a 2,500 gallon tank. So what is that? 20,000 pounds when it's full. So that's a lot of pressure potentially on this root system. And I just feel like it could affect that tree in the future and cause some damage to it. So really paying attention of where you're siting your tanks to point this out, because valve right there. Just as way to and collecting it would here totally unneeded.
All right, I'm not exactly sure what happened to Chris's internet, but it looks like he's gone and hasn't shown back up. So I'm just wondering if Marielle, you want to go ahead and come on and wrap it up for us now.
Well, I can wrap it up. I don't know what all I can say, but I thank everybody for participating. And Chris will be back in October for the second half of his presentation. And then next month, we're looking forward to having Dr. Pfau from Tarleton State University talking about genetics and how he's helped out with our tracking project. So everybody have a good evening. Thank you very much. And we'll catch you next month.